Welcome, all pregnant families, midwives, or birth workers. This is Tracy Anderson Askew, your host for the Transform Your Birth podcast, changing your mind about birth one story at a time. Each week, we will be exploring a birth story through the lens of what birth can teach us. I'll be digging deep into each story so you can learn what it is that can change the way a birth unfolds. We can't control birth, but we can influence it. So listen in to find out how. Enjoy. Maryn Green has been attending women as a midwife since 2009, first as a licensed midwife and now as a spiritual midwife that helps facilitate the ceremonies of birth and mothering. Maryn is well known for being the founder of the Indie Birth Association and Indie Birth Midwifery School, which educates women and midwives all over the world. She has her own podcast called Taking Back Birth that encourages women and midwives to rethink what they have been taught and reconnect with ancient wisdom and the spiritual journey of birth. She is also the author of the book Indie Birth, A Story of Radical Birth Love in 2019. Maryn has given birth to 10 children and currently lives in Hawaii. Today we look at how birth is a rite of passage, how we can prepare for birth through ceremony and ritual, and she shares some great insights through her own birth experiences. I truly loved having a conversation about birth that goes beyond the things that can happen to exploring the greater meaning of birth as a transformational process for the birthing woman and the baby, and the intricate dance between the two. A fresh new perspective. Enjoy, dear ones.
Before we begin, a note from our sponsor. This episode has been brought to you by Transform Parenting, an organisation that provides courses, coaching and community from pregnancy through to the first 7 years of a child's life. Most of the stories you will hear through this podcast are graduates of the Transform Your Birth workshop held in Canberra. Our Transform Your Birth Today course is now available to anyone, anywhere, at any time, and includes all the wonderful wisdom of this course and live weekly catch-ups when you need it with our host, Tracy. For a little taste, please accept our pregnancy gift offer, which contains free the first few lessons and some essential wisdom for pregnancy. The link can be found in these show notes or visit transformyourbirth.com.au. And now for the episode.
Hello again. I'm back this week with the lovely Maryn Green, and I was very excited to get Maryn onto this podcast because Maryn has a very rich background in working with women through birth as a midwife, a spiritual midwife, but she's also a mother of 10. So I absolutely have to delve into some of her birth stories when in this podcast, because I know that every journey you take with a baby is going to put you on a different path of learning, awakening, activation, and opening to much more deeper parts of you that are ready to emerge as you get ready to parent this child and this human soul. So welcome, Maryn. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thank you, Tracy. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to see what comes up today.
Yeah, and I love the topic for this is really about looking at birth as a rite of passage. That's not a term we tend to use in our culture, and yet I think it's such a profound change and transformation that women go through when they, prepare to give birth, and also the realm of parenting. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your background, Maryn, and yeah, how you got into this field, what called you in this space.
I have 10 children, as you shared, and really it was their births. So more specifically, our first baby was born in the hospital just because we didn't know any better and really had a typical experience there. It wasn't absolutely horrible, but there were things that I didn't like and that felt traumatizing. So with the birth of our second, at the last minute, really, kind of funny, just about a week or two before he was born, we decided to have a home birth. And that was the birth that led me into midwifery. I almost said changed my life, but the first one definitely changed my life. And they all have in their own ways. But the second one was just this pivotal experience of having a midwife, of birthing in a birth pool, of feeling what it felt like to be somewhat autonomous or more autonomous than I had been in the first birth. And most important to me at the time, my baby was not taken from me. So he was born at home. He never left my arms. He nursed till he was 4 years old. He is now a very confident, almost 20-year-old. And I knew after his birth that I was intrigued. Um, I didn't know anything about midwifery. I didn't know anything about birth work. And I definitely was a little scared in a way of what I didn't know. If the training was something I could do, how would I do an apprenticeship with little kids? And it all just unfolded, really. It was something that I would say was definitely spirit led. I think many of us in birth feel that it is a spiritual calling. And I didn't know that that's what it was at the time. But here I am 20 years later with lots more babies and many years as a midwife. And I know that that's what that call was at that time.
I relate to that. That's exactly what happened to me with my first birth is I changed
Mm.
caregivers at 2 weeks just prior to being due. And that changed everything in my life and how I experienced my first birth. Awoke
Mm.
things in me that I didn't know existed. So
Yeah.
I had this very similar calling in that way. And I often think birth workers are called to this work. I think it's very sacred. It's very ancestral. It's the wise women that, guide women through this process. It's always been that way through history. It doesn't matter what culture you're in. So you had the calling, you became a midwife. Tell us what happened then.
It took me 5 years after that birth. I started an apprenticeship when he was only 4 months old. So here I was worried how I would do it with two little kids. And I was offered an apprenticeship, and you find a way to do it. We ended up moving around the US a bunch to have me finish that apprenticeship. And we wound up in the state of Arizona, which is a state that licenses midwives. I had come from another state that didn't. So I had this belief that licensing was something I wanted. It was something that maybe made midwifery and birth safer. And after all of the training and pursuing the license and receiving the license, a couple of years after that, I came to find out that those things weren't necessarily true for me. Um, I didn't realize how political midwifery is and how licensing, really of all kinds, allows, this third party, really like the government, into your bedroom. And as a woman, I wasn't okay with that. And I quickly realized that as a midwife, I also was not okay with that, that my soul's path of this work, that really, even at that time, felt a lot more spiritual than maybe it does to some, this piece didn't fit. So I wound up in a legal battle with the state of Arizona for many years over my license. It's in our book. The whole story is in our book called Indie Birth, A Story of Radical Birth Love. You can find it on Amazon. And, there was no criminal matter. There wasn't anything that had happened really. It was just an administrative matter where they kind of wanted to make an example of me for practicing outside of the very medicalized guidelines that are usually set with licensing. So I credit that experience, which was very difficult, with a whole new path, a whole new path being forged for me. I always say that I don't regret it. If I had to do it over, I would, because I saw the truth of what I think birth is and what I think women's bodies can do, and, how I think it's a rite of passage and this beautiful sacred experience. And it's like I had to make that choice more openly. So that's the long, sort of short version. And that was 12 years ago. So I gave my license back. And ever since then, I have moved around, lived in different places, but I have continued to work as a midwife outside of the licensing structure successfully, um, for many reasons, I think. But the biggest one being that I truly believe in what I'm doing. And I don't think there's anything wrong with it. This isn't this isn't medicalized birth to me. And midwifery has become that in many places, but really just being able to work with women and their families, again, in this more connected spiritual way, is outside of kind of any guideline of like major medicalized midwifery. So it's been quite a journey. And that's the short version of the last decade.
I think you're hitting on a point there, of how over the decades and even centuries, I guess, when we first started to medicalize birth and we took birth out of the hands of the wise women in the community and we put it in the hands of health professionals, doctors, midwives, within a system that in many ways took something that was a normal life event and pathologized it, turned it into a medical event. And I think that belief system still permeates a lot of the practice of doctors, particularly because that's how they're trained, although it'll always depend on the individual, and also midwives as well who work in the system. And I've talked to a lot of midwives who can get very worn down by a system that continues to practice interfering in the birth process. Now, sometimes that's appropriate. Probably most of the time it isn't. And what that's done is it's led to a very strong culture of fear around birth and women learning not to trust their bodies. And
Definitely.
so a big part of the intention that I have in this podcast and the work that I do preparing women for birth is to return their confidence in a system that is age-old, that is actually automated in the body, and to identify what can we do to remove any sort of internal, mental, emotional, spiritual obstacles that can get in the way of your body just really responding organically, physiologically to your birth process. I think it's important that we reclaim our confidence around birth. So I'm not surprised you kind of ditched the system and decided to follow your own path. My initial midwife felt very similar to you, and we used to have long conversations with her about, the issues of protecting women and babies, but at the same time, not, not diminishing their confidence and their internal power to really believe in themselves. So with that said, Maryn, you set on a path of continuing to work with women outside of the system and continuing to have babies. How did you manage all of that?
I think my babies were very agreeable, for one, as were the women that I served over those many years. I got the honor in my own training as a midwife to work with a midwife who had a couple of kids herself and brought the baby, whoever that was for her at the time, to births. So even as a student, I was welcome to do that. And I saw how that worked and how it was just really her life, like being a midwife isn't just this one thing that I do. I'm a mother and we are women together. So, having a baby present that isn't yours at your birth isn't for every woman. But during those years, those weren't the women I met. I met women that were more than open to it, that enjoyed having my baby around. And pretty much every baby of mine after those first two did go to birth until they could move around, crawl, whatever. So 7, 8 months or so. And I have to say, it always worked out. It wasn't always easy, but it always worked out. So, my baby would often sleep when the baby was being born. I got really good at just being able to lay my baby down in another room. So, honestly, my kids were really agreeable. And I think they also learned how to be flexible in a certain way, just kind of coming with. Uh, because what does a baby really need, right? Just his mom. That's really all they need. So as long as I was there and there was breast milk and a place to snuggle, it really was great. I definitely had help at times with an assistant or whatever, but I have great memories of it. It was challenging, but it really allowed me to just really feel where the women were at as well, especially if we were pregnant at the same time.
What you're describing is the village, the ultimate village.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just get on with life.
Yeah. Yeah. It happened a number of times too, where I can think of, one postpartum period where somebody called me at, it was way earlier than I had expected. I expected to get maybe a month of rest and just doing my own thing, but this woman went into labor a couple weeks early, right? It happens. So, packing up my baby at 2 weeks postpartum, going down the street to attend a birth. It's happened on both sides, pregnancy kind of right before I would have a baby, I'd have a birth to attend. And then on the other side of kind of bringing this newborn along. And I remember all of those births really well just because of the timing, I think.
Mm. You would have been very much in that altered state postpartum and then coming into a birthing space again. That would have given you incredible sensitivity, I imagine, to the woman you're working with.
Yeah, I remember my last baby that was born, Rumi. We had a string of births about a month after he was born. And I felt physically well and fine. And that's kind of always been the pattern. It's hard for me to rest more than a month anyway. So it was physically fine. But I remember feeling that. One birth I missed. The other two were actually quite long and difficult. And I had such a different sense being with them. It had only been a month since I had been through it. So yeah, they're really interesting memories to hold.
Mm. So let's talk about some of your births, Maryn, and how what you've learned birthing each one of your children. I'll just premise this with a story I was sharing with Maryn before we started recording about my own auntie who had 15 children. And of course, in this field of birth, I've always been fascinated by people's birth stories, but particularly women who've had many babies. And I spoke to my Auntie Robin once about her births and asked her, what was it like? And she said every one of them was different. And I was a bit surprised by that because I thought surely, after, I don't know, 6, 7, you'd just open your legs and away they'd fly out. The path of least resistance, everything's very soft and open by then. But no, she talked specifically about her last three and just how different they are. And then she made this comment: what I was learning in the pregnancy and the type of birth that I had was God's way. This is her language. She's a devout Catholic. Was God's way of preparing me to mother that child. She saw that pregnancy and the birth process is very much preparation to be ready to parent this child, because like I always say, you're not giving birth to a piece of meat, you're giving birth to a human soul. And of course, there's going to be this dance between the mother and the baby through this magical connection that they share. And I'm sure there's communication that we'll never be able to measure or quantify or do any of that, but we do sense it intuitively. So with that said, having another lovely woman like Maryn who's had 10 babies, tell us a bit about the lessons you've learned with some of your births and how they unfolded for you.
I love that quote and sentiment. That's so beautiful.
Mm.
Totally agree. And I think that's really cool that she was able to see that in a way.
Yeah.
Lots of practice with 15, though, eventually. You see some of the patterns. I feel like it took me a little bit longer, not 15, but probably, well into it, probably not till the birth of my fourth baby, where that became clear to me, that they were so unique as souls. And my fourth baby was my first eventful birth, really. So again, the first was a hospital birth, second was a home birth, third was a home birth. And then the fourth came, and I was really deep into my midwifery apprenticeship at that point. And I was working with a midwife who I would say wasn't as aligned as the one I had started with. She was much more medicalized. And I was grateful. I still am. I learned a lot of skills from her. I learned a lot of what I didn't want to do. But point being that a lot of the births I saw before I birthed my fourth baby were really complicated and full of more fear than I had really ever seen in birth. So I don't think that was an accident. And I think my baby played a huge part. He's 15 now, but it was a very unique experience. The labor was different for sure. The whole pregnancy was really odd. It was hard to connect with him to the point where I thought, is there something I need to know here? Is he okay? Is there something going on? And it was also my first highly connected spiritually pregnancy. So, I was hearing his guides talk. I was seeing things all of the time. I was getting messages, and it was clear he was from another realm. So, my human brain wanted to make sense of that, but there was nothing to make sense of it in this realm. So, I thought, do I want an ultrasound? Do I want to check things out? And the answer was always no. He's fine. So, I had this really crazy pregnancy experience where he didn't really feel like his soul was very connected to his body, like he would go out a lot. And so at his birth, when he was born, he came out and his soul was clearly not in his body. And the midwife lost her mind and called 911, and a transport ensued. And when they got him up in the helicopter, because that was the method of travel to get to the hospital, he was absolutely fine. And when we got to the hospital, they put him on the table and he was screaming, and they just looked at me and they said, why are you here? And I explained that he wasn't breathing at birth and he was not just blue, but white. I mean, it wasn't a great experience. But anyway, my husband came to pick us up. We were home in less than an hour, and it was a lot to process for sure. It taught me so much. And I think as a midwife, one of the coolest things it taught me was how to be patient as a baby transitions to life on this plane. And I know for a fact that, the universe has put me with women at different birth scenarios where they've had a similar situation. And, I think I have been able to use my experience for the better and not panic and, allow these babies to come in their own time, maybe using some skills if we need them. But he so profoundly taught me of the importance of holding space during this time. So he's a very interesting and loving and amazing and smart boy. But he still sort of struggles with change and transitions of some kinds. So it wasn't me. We didn't do anything wrong. It was like this convergence of experience and what was needed and what has been needed, as you so eloquently said, to parent him. That was, yeah, my initiation, so to
Mm.
speak, into, I don't want to say complicated birth, but like very multi-layered experience of birth.
Mm.
Yeah.
I recall my first midwife sharing an experience of a baby being slow to transition into life. And she said to the mother, call the baby in. And
Mm.
the mother did, and the baby came in. You know, it's quite extraordinary that there's so much more going on than what we can see through our senses or feel through our senses. In that space, Maryn, how did you stay calm in that space? What mindset or belief were you holding when you saw the struggle your baby had to come in?
To be honest, I don't know that I was calm. I do remember having the thought that he was not going to be okay when I pulled him out of the water.
Mm.
I had seen enough babies be born, and it was kind of like, oh, wow, this is not good. And I had been working with a shamanic teacher. My husband was working with the same one. And so I think that's the first thing I said to him, actually. I said, call her, just because that was like one of my main spiritual supports. So he did. And funny you said what you said, because later she reported when she did like check in with this baby and his soul, she said he was out fishing. Like he didn't know he had been born. And it really kind of fit the story. I mean, she wasn't there. So I totally trust that a version of that is true. And then on the physical realm, I was really direct in how I handled it. I think as a midwife, that's part of our training. And it was a good experience in that way, as funny as it sounds. So I birthed my placenta right away on my own within minutes. Like I told my body, like, this is what you need to do. We need to go do this. And these EMS guys came, they said to me, we don't have room for you in the helicopter. There's only room for the baby. And I said, absolutely not. I'm going. And he said, well, if anything, if you need anything, we can't help you. And I said, don't worry about it. You're not going to need to help me at all. I'm going. So it was kind of a level of power and like self authority that I hadn't realized before in birth. And that came to really serve me as a midwife. It served me in many of my other births, including my last one, where I also went to the hospital voluntarily at a certain point, just to be clear in my own intention and power, and to recognize that when you do ask for help or you do feel you need help, that you're still a powerful being. This isn't a victim situation. So I was wanting their help, but I also was not going to not go with my baby. And that was all there was to it.
Messing with the mother beast, trying to separate
Yes,
the mother from a baby. That's a dangerous call, I'd say.
it is. But, I mean, I know we've both probably seen it a million times. And there's no judgment on that. I think women are often just frozen, right? Or scared and whatever. But this was my fourth baby. I had seen other stuff and it was just like, no,
Mm,
that's not happening.
yeah. What other stories have you got around your births?
Hmm. Oh man, there's so many. Well, they were also wonderful. The one that followed was super simple, number 5. So the fifth baby, right after that fourth birth story, she came really easy and fast. And let's see which one to focus on. Hmm. I mean, they're all so different. Um, Number 7 was kind of a longer birth. I didn't expect that. She was the one that I thought would be born in a couple of hours after my waters opened, and she wasn't born for 24 hours after that. And she really reflects that in her personality. Just she has to wait until she can do something totally correct and right on time, and then she's willing to do it. The baby that came after her was actually a miscarriage, a late miscarriage. So that's a whole other story of holding a baby in my womb for 3 or 4 months that wasn't alive until he got evicted. Basically, it was finally time for him to come out. And that was a huge learning experience as well. A highly spiritual experience of being connected to death. We talk about being connected to birth and pregnancy, but there is that element of death, on the other side of the coin. So there was a lot to be learned there. And then the baby after him was, of course, totally redemptive. I was so excited to get pregnant with her, as I was with all of them, but especially after a loss, you're kind of wondering, right? Like, what will happen? Or, how will this go? So her birth was extremely healing and just really beautiful. And she was born in the same month, but a year later as the miscarriage baby. So it felt really, really special and, they're all connected, of course, whether they're here or not.
Amazing. So, what would you say to women about birth being a rite of passage? How do you help women to start to tap into that other side of birth? So often, um, women when they're pregnant do all the reading or listening to podcasts or Googling and, try to inform themselves. But taking it from that information place to something much deeper, how do you think we can help women to understand and start to appreciate some of that inner wisdom within their body and how that's connected to creation, really?
Yeah. It's such a huge undertaking in some way because it's been so conditioned out of us. We've been so programmed to forget.
Mm.
And I do think it's important to go before pregnancy if we can, especially with young girls, as they're getting their cycles, learning their body. It's never too early for doing that and for going inward and tuning into not just how you feel, but how your body's feeling and how connected or not you feel to the cycles of the moon or the earth, right? We're so separate in our living that I think it's really hard for women that have lived that way their whole lives, and now they get pregnant and it's just like another thing. It's just like this physical process and somebody else will tell you how to do it and how to manage it and if anything's wrong. And women forget that they're amazing creators, to grow a baby, to conceive and grow a baby. Obviously, we know this. We don't have to think about it. We don't have to know how it works, right? The baby's just creating itself kind of as we are. However, I think when babies are doing that, when they are creating themselves, they are dependent on our own energy. They are dependent on our own emotions. They are connected to other realms. And, that's all the stuff that we'll never be able to study. Like, how actually does this work? We think we know the science of it, but like, on a mystical, spiritual level, there's so much mystery. So I think even that, rite of passage is accurate for me. And there are other rites of passage in life, right? Like being born. That's our first rite of passage. And we have other rites as women, especially in this life, and they all contain some kind of mystery. They all contain this ability for transformation. And that's what a rite of passage is. It's an initiation into a new phase of life. So even if someone is maybe getting started with some of the spiritual connection, or maybe they don't feel that connected, I'm just approaching it as this is going to change me. So how how might I be changed, right? Like, am I open to that? My life is going to change. My body is going to change. My relationship is going to change. These are all things that happen in this initiation. So I think there are these like more foundational ways to play with it and feel into it. And then if that resonates for somebody, like you said, there's so many places to go. Your connection with your own baby, I think, is just one of the most beautiful and mysterious things I've ever experienced. And I can't always find the words for that myself because it's a personal experience. But like the downloads that you feel like you can get in pregnancy, whether it's from the baby or a source or whoever, right? Like we're just open and the universe is preparing us, like you said, to meet this soul and to be able to mother them. So it's just a very beautiful and intense thing.
When I was pregnant with my first son, and it was about 2 or 3 days before he was born, and because my father was a redhead and my husband's a redhead, I just thought I'd have redheaded children. And I was lying on my husband's chest and I had this vision of a baby's face just come to me just from nowhere. I wasn't thinking, it just popped into my mind. And I said to my husband, I think I've just seen our baby. And what was so striking about the vision was it wasn't a red-headed child. He had olivish skin, which is very strong in my family, but in my mother's family. And he had these little ears that poked out and they were a little bit sort of low. And he just looked different to what I expected. But it was such a striking image that I said, oh, maybe that's our baby. And about 3 days after he was born, I looked at him and it was the exact same image that I had seen. And he showed himself to me before he was actually born.
I
And
believe it.
it was one of those profound moments of mystery that you can't understand how those things happen, but they do happen. And one of the goals that I have for the families that I work with is to help them to really, one, see the power of this transformation. Too often women feel like they've lost something when they have a baby. It feels like a sense of loss, and it is a loss. It's a loss of life. But there's so much emerging, and I try to bring awareness to what it is that's emerging. But the biggest challenge I think pregnant women have and new mothers have is there's so much noise around their system through whether it be phones or advice or seeking out other people's stories or people projecting their stories onto them, that it's hard for them to tap into that inner system. And when I work with new parents, I give them challenges, weekly challenges. And the first one is to stay off Google for a week and see how you go.
Mm.
And
That's a hard one.
and another one is to do one thing at a time instead of trying to multitask. So when you're feeding, just really be there and look at your baby and just be in that moment and start to practice those skills of presence and skills and experiences of being attuned or being connected to your little ones. And when we do that, we start to enter into a different part of the brain and a different sense of being and connectedness. But we can't do that when we're surrounded by noise and we're Googling and scrolling and doing all these other things that disconnect us from what I would consider to be some of the richest and most meaningful parts of what it is to be human and through that transformation. Have you got any similar stories like that, Maryn?
About the Googling?
Just about how, and I imagine, given what you teach and what you share with the world, how you've started to awaken to some of the richer parts of what it is to be a mother and the connection that we have with these children we bring in.
I think it is a discipline in some ways, like you shared, with maybe having assignments for people, a way to maybe stop and just feel what you're feeling. I think a lot of the Googling, even though we're joking about it, is actually this like trauma response. It's a need to, fight or flight. There's just like this adrenaline running in people all of the time. And we know that social media and all of that certainly doesn't help.
Yeah.
So the simple act of stopping, and, I work with women in their pregnancies too, and we do a lot of somatic work. So, that's a really fancy way of just saying, let's feel what's here right now.
Mm.
You know, let's feel what's here for you right now. Let's feel what's in your body. And kind of coaching and supporting women through all of the things that are there when they actually stop. And it's not always rainbows, Sometimes when we stop, we realize we're really uncomfortable or maybe we're really anxious. And I invite that in personally. I think, I'm always like, oh, wow, okay, what's there for me? I don't want to cover it up. I want to feel it. But that's a new practice for a lot of women. So I don't know that, especially new mamas, having your first baby, I think it's so easy to not be aware of what you're feeling at all because we're really not trained to pay attention. from a very young age, we're kind of dissociating, or, someone else is telling us when we're allowed to use the bathroom, things like that. So having a baby in there, doesn't restore any kind of natural connection. And then, like we said, women are sort of unconsciously maybe adopting these other behaviors that aren't very grounding. They aren't very helpful. Getting out, on the earth, being in nature has been one of my best tools in my own pregnancies. And for many of mine, most of mine, we lived in Sedona, Arizona, which, if you don't know, is just one of the most beautiful places on earth. So I was lucky in that, that I could go out hiking every morning and be in the mountains and all of that, but purposely taking that time, whether it's 10 minutes or an hour, leaving your phone at home, um, feeling the vibration of the earth, talking to your ancestors. Like, there's so much that's there for us when we're quiet and we just put the phone down. And, it's a discipline for all of us. I still don't do that every morning. I have to make myself leave my phone home if I don't need it. And I always have a different experience, right? Like, I always feel more connected, or maybe I'll meet somebody that I don't know and we'll have a nice conversation, or I'll get a really great idea for a project. I think we just don't realize how much we're losing, in the modern world with the way living is. And I think it's detrimental for pregnancy, in this conscious way, like babies are still going to come out. We are a very resilient form of mammal. So babies are still coming out, but I think there is this new type of soul coming onto this planet, in the last couple of whatever years, and I'm sure will continue. And I think they are more demanding spiritually of their parents. So I get the honor of working with a lot of those people. And, they're just doing their best, as everyone does, to raise their vibration and bring in this soul in the ways that is being asked. And it's maybe not the typical stuff.
Fascinating. I could talk about this stuff for a long time. It is.
I love it.
It's these mysterious forces and aspects to what it is to be human that we don't often tap into. I think your comment about the somatic work that you do is one of the key things to return us back to those abilities of attuning and to sense and to feel and to know what our babies need rather than thinking what our babies need. What are you noticing in your body and how are you noticing it? Asking yourself these questions. What's here for me right now? What are the thoughts? What are the feelings? But what else is going on in your body? And when you do start to notice, what you do is you come out of that thinking brain and you come into more of a feeling sense. And that, to me, is that short circuit to intuition and inner wisdom, which is the capacity to know. It's beyond thinking. It's way faster and more efficient than thinking, and it's way more truthful often than the thoughts that we have. So any type of somatic noticing, I think, can be a pathway to that. Maryn, a lot of preparation rituals that we have in birth revolve around the old, there's a way of doing it through blessing ways, which is coming into circle with women. But too often we make it about the gifts and the party games. And what do you call that?
Right. Like a baby shower, yeah.
Baby shower. That's what I was trying to think. A baby shower. We celebrate the welcoming in of a child through a baby shower, which can be fun. And, you get friends together and you have nice food and you might play some games and all of that. There's no judgment there. But then there's another way that I was introduced through my own midwife called blessing ways, where we sit in circle with women and each woman offers a blessing to the baby, and it can be done through many different ways, lighting candles or threading a bead on a thread for that woman to wear a necklace in labour, or all sorts of things. And I know you've done a little bit of this. What sort of rituals have you been a part of or instigated that can support women to appreciate what they're walking into, this mystery of birth, in a more profound way?
Hmm. There's lots of versions, I think.
Mm.
And what usually feels right to me, and of course, if I'm serving a woman, she can decide if it feels right to her, but is honoring the mother. So, I love babies. They will be honored. They should be honored, but I think that the focus on the baby can be just difficult, for women in a sense. Not that they're not excited, but I love the kind of blessing or ritual where this woman is reminded of her own power and that
Mm.
whatever it is we want to remind her of, or whatever wisdom it is that we want to share in this positive light. I've seen all kinds of things like you said, but yeah, focusing on the woman and her own resources and her strength and pampering her even. I've been a part of many of those where it's just rubbing her feet and giving her a foot bath and doing henna on her belly and feeding her beautiful snacks. And so the baby is part for sure, but it's more of this lifting up of this woman to
Mm.
say, you can do this, you will do this. Again, this initiation, right? So before any initiatory process, I'm sure there's preparation. There's preparation for this journey ahead. And I think that's how this blessing way can be. That we're here, your sisters are with you, even if we're not going to be there at the birth. Like you said, sometimes, things are given like candles, right? So everybody will take a candle home and light the candle when this woman goes into her birth process. So it can begin a circle of support that hopefully she feels, right? Even from afar during the birth and postpartum as well. So I love ritual, but I think part of some of the mother blessings can also be a preparation for the postpartum. And that can be practical. It can be, doing ritual and ceremony and then having that whole group of women in the kitchen cooking food for this pregnant mama to put in her freezer, or having a circle about support for this woman after birth. Who's going to do what? Is there a list? Is there, does she have things that she's going to need? I think that can be really nice in the last part of pregnancy to feel like you're kind of being prepared and supported for what's after the baby, because the baby is so great, but also, you know, life after the baby is, as they say, right? That's the longest part. So we also want women to feel loved and supported and like they have, what they need to mother, because that's the hard part.
That's where the real journey begins. I think you've touched on another example of how we do tend to focus on the baby at the expense of the mother. And I always say the baby's fine if the mother's fine. Focus on the mother,
Right.
because she's certainly the one that is under a whole level of new demands on her being the new mother. And so whatever we can do to lift women up. So it's beautiful you describe some of that, Maryn, because I really appreciate for those who are listening to this to really consider, how do you want to celebrate this time? And whilst baby showers are fun and that might be something you want to do, it's not a bad idea also to bring together a group of women who you trust, who would be open to really imparting some of their wisdom or their wishes for you, either in a practical sense or through their words. Um, and, look at different options to celebrate in a more sacred, deliberate way of preparing that mother. Something worth thinking about. So, Maryn, is there anything you would like to say to finish off our time today?
Oh, there are so many things I could say. Any particular idea, topic?
What would you say to a pregnant woman who's opening her mind to the idea of birth being a rite of passage and potentially celebrating it in in different ways. What sort of support and advice would you give her?
I would definitely remind her that this is in our body and our cells, that women have been birthing forever. And when fears and doubts crop up, those are also normal. And that's part of the process as well. It's not always to just be fearless and have nothing at all to work on. I think pregnancy is also a time of shadow work for a lot of women. It's a time of really unearthing old beliefs, particularly around mothering and maybe other things in our past where they're being brought up so that we can face them and we can choose which way do I want to go. And I think the baby is highly responsible for that. So, embracing kind of that deep work of pregnancy is intimidating, but it can be done. And I think the support of other women is beautiful, whether that's a midwife or a doula or just women and friends in your life and your family. Listening as best you can to your body, especially if you're not feeling terribly connected to the baby or anything. Just taking those moments, like we talked about, to just slow down and just see what's there and ask God, ask Spirit, ask who you believe in to help and dreaming about it, dreaming about your baby. That's one great avenue to receiving wisdom from your higher self that, sometimes we blow off. We think, oh, it's just a dream. But in pregnancy, everything is meaningful. You're open to other ideas. You're also impressionable to fear, right? We can really take that in. So it is a lot of work to approach pregnancy in a conscious way, but I think it is what we were made to do. And again, that brings us back full circle to the initiation. If an initiation was easy, if it was, no big deal to walk across the hot coals, what would the point be, right? There wouldn't be a reward necessarily, or again, this transformation. So opening yourself up, asking for support, and seeing what comes in for you that feels real and true for you, because we're all so different.
Beautiful. Well said. Well, my dear community, thank you for listening in again this week. I love that we're delving into more of the behind the scenes, under the physical and the mental, to really appreciating the process of birth and parenting, becoming a mother, and raising these precious children that we're gifted with. That it's so much more than what we often talk about and what we're led to believe. And so I hope today's discussion with Maryn has really opened you up to thinking about things in new ways and potentially inviting in a greater sense of connection to the process. So once again, we'll have some more goodness for you next week. I'd love you to join us again. Please share and review this podcast. We really appreciate your support, and we'll see you again. Bye. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please subscribe and share this podcast. This episode has been brought to you by Transform Parenting, an organisation that provides courses, coaching and community from pregnancy through to the first 7 years of a child's life. It is a place where you can learn, get support and grow into your role as a parent. Why not take advantage of a special gift for all pregnant women at transformyourbirth.com.au. Or if you have children, we have a gift for parents also.